The blazing June sun of 1676 hangs heavy over the humid, mosquito-choked streets of Jamestown. The air is thick with the scent of tobacco, the scent of the James River, and the palpable fury of a people at their breaking point. Outside the State House, the square is choked with 500 armed men of all classes, frontier planters, landless freedmen, and restless hunters. Their muskets are primed, their eyes fixed on the heavy oak doors of the chamber. Suddenly, the doors swing open with a dramatic flourish. Out steps one man, Sir William Berkeley, the long-ruling governor of Virginia. Ruler since a young man, now 70 years old, he remains the undisputed architect of the colony's seigneurial order. His lace collar is wilted by the staggering heat, but his back is straight as a pike as his eyes blaze with a fury that is to him righteous, and to the 500 armed men just another infuriating sign of his haughtiness. Facing him is a younger man, a cousin by marriage, a member of his own council, and now his greatest nemesis, Nathaniel Bacon. Bacon's men prepare their pieces. The synchronized click of flintlocks echoes in the sudden, terrifying silence of the square. It is a moment of drama, the old world of the high court Cavalier, facing the raw, jagged fury of the frontier he himself created. Berkeley does not flinch. He reaches for the front of his fine silk doublet, rips it open to expose his bare chest to the muzzles of the guns, and roars with the voice that once commanded the king's horse, "Here! Shoot me, 'fore God, a fair mark! Shoot!" Bacon does not fire, nor does he accept when the enraged governor draws his sword with an aristocratic flourish and challenges him to a duel to settle things then and there. Death is not what he wants. Not yet, at least. But in this moment of aristocratic defiance, the old patterns of Virginia come to a violent, screeching halt. This is not revolt of the oppressed masses against a tyrant. It is a civil war within the state itself. It is the explosive climax of the horrors of Indian attacks, mixed with the injustices of a process we call engrossment, the systematic swallowing up of the Virginia landscape by a handful of leading families, and the rigors imposed by mercantilist trade policies. It is the fire that will eventually forge the stable, refined golden age of the Old Dominion. Today, that's what we're going to look at. The Great Engrossment, the terror of the frontier, and Bacon's rebellion, seeing how the combination of each turned a volatile colony of servants into a refined dominion of masters. This is the story of Bacon's rebellion, what led to it, what happened during it, and how the topping people recovered from it. Welcome back to The Old World with Will Tanner, the show where we tell the tales of the great colonial adventurers and magnificent American and British families of the world that used to exist. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share this video around if you like it. That's how we grow and keep this project going. Last time, we continued the tale of Virginia with the myth of the Virginia Cavalier, diving deep to discuss whether such fellows really were real, or if they were just myths in the minds of colonials who wished to point to a genteel heritage that was really just a figment of their overactive imaginations. Which was it? Were the famed Cavaliers of Virginia real? Well, you're going to have to listen to that episode to find out. This time, we're discussing what happened next, with a focus on the very famous and much misunderstood Bacon's Rebellion. Was it a proto-American revolution? A rising of the rabble? A misunderstood response to Indian attacks blown all out of proportion? We'll discuss all of that, along with the economic conditions that led to it happening. To understand why Nathaniel Bacon stood in that square and stared down the most powerful man in the colony, we must look past the muskets and toward the riverfronts. By the 1670s, the Cavalier migration had done its work, as had the early settlement patterns. The first families are mostly entrenched, and under Berkeley's stewardship, they are engineering the landscape to reflect the hierarchy they've created. This is the era of the Great Engrossment. In the 17th century lexicon, to engross meant to swallow up or monopolize. In the Virginia of this period, it means that the most strategic, fertile, and deep water reaches of the James, the York, the Rappahannock rivers are being systematically claimed by a tiny interlocked clique of a few leading families. As Evans notes in his The Topping People, a Green Spring faction, a powerful cabal of land-hungry grandees centered around Governor Berkeley, controls pretty much every land patent worth holding, and they're constantly accumulating new ones as the frontier is pushed west and new lands are found. They game the system with ruthless efficiency. Through the headright system, a grandee like Richard Lee or William Byrd uses his resources to bring over 50 indentured servants, claims, as is his right, 50 acres for every head, and stitches together a multi-thousand-acre riverfront empire in a single stroke, using his pull and contacts to ensure the best land is his. Or he just buys it, or finds a way to be granted it. Often some combination of all three is used by the grandees as they stitch together empires of tens of thousands of prime tobacco acres. By the time their servants finish their years of labor, they step out into a world where pretty much every inch of prime tobacco land is already owned, and the scraps in the deep woodlands, areas from which it is much harder and more expensive to get hogsheads of tobacco to waiting ships, are left for them. The Topping People have used the capital with which they arrived in the colony, along with their connections to the governor, to build a wall of private estates that locks the freedmen out of the riverborne economy. But the land squeeze is only half the pressure cooker. The other half is the cold, hard math of the tobacco leaf and its production. As we discussed in episode 1, the English Crown, through the Navigation Acts, enforces a mercantilist trade policy that is proving catastrophic at this point for Virginians of every stripe, but particularly the yeomen who can only grow so much tobacco with their own hands. These acts force all tobacco to be shipped in English vessels to English ports, and thus destroys the lucrative trade with the Dutch the Virginians had been engaging in. The Dutch offer far better prices than do the English. Thus, the Navigation Acts create an English monopsony that strangles the Chesapeake, forcing all the tobacco to England, and thus really pushes down prices. As Philip Alexander Bruce details in his Economic History of Virginia in the 17th century, the results are devastating. Tobacco prices, which once sustained a comfortable existence for even small farmers, plummet, falling into the sub-penny trap. The leaf sells for less than a penny per pound, a price so low it barely covers the cost of the tools used to harvest it, so low that the common people in Virginia complain of being unable to even clothe themselves or their families. The grandees, with their thousands of acres and vast labor forces, can survive on volume and scale. Times are tough, but not entirely bleak. Using their superior resources, they can engross more land, wait for better markets, and utilize their political positions to offset the losses. But for the yeoman, the man working just a few acres with his own hands, enough to produce a hogshead or two of quality leaf each season, the sub-penny price is a death sentence. He falls into a spiral of debt, his social mobility is frozen, and the only land left for his children is the dangerous, contested interior, far from the safety and efficiency of the rivers and deep in the shadow of the Indians on the frontier. It is bleak, frustrating, dangerous, and infuriating. And that was the economic environment leading up to Bacon's rebellion. So now, the year is 1675, and the frontier is a landscape of existential terror as it explodes into the deadly specter of an Indian revolt of a sort unseen in many years. The Indian attacks are no longer rare and mere skirmishes. They are a gruesome, constant reality. Frontier families are butchered in their sleep. Homesteads are reduced to ash. A climate of fear pervades the colony, and men sleep with their muskets in their beds, if they sleep at all. To the frontier planter, the primary duty of the governor is protection, but Berkeley hesitates. Berkeley's critics, now gathering around the young and impulsive Nathaniel Bacon, a Cavalier of ancient lineage who is fresh to the colony, charge that the governor is protecting the Indians to preserve his own lucrative monopoly on the fur trade. This could be the only reason why he refuses to call up and send out a relief force to crush the Indian attackers, and why he dithers with an expensive and ineffective policy of building isolated little forts along the frontier. He must be in bed with the Indians. Whether true or not, Berkeley's policy of defensive forts is seen by the frontiersmen as an expensive, useless tax that does nothing to stop the raiding parties who are butchering them in their own homes. It's into this scene that the dashing and heroic Nathaniel Bacon steps. He is no indigent frontiersman, indentured servant, or the like. He's a Cavalier of high stock, a cousin of the highly influential Nathaniel Bacon the Elder, and a cousin of Governor Berkeley. He's a graduate of Cambridge, a son of an influential landowner in Britain, owner of a great estate, and a man who was given a seat on the council within weeks of his arrival. But Bacon is not just a budding grande who wraps himself in the flourish of those romantic cavaliers of legend. He's also a man of immense ambition, who finds himself locked out of the inner sanctum of the Green Spring faction, and who sees the policy of dithering as the Indian attacks rage as utterly unjust. He chooses to lead the enraged frontiersmen and the others who band with them in the defense of their homes. It helps his decision that a recent Indian attack led to the death of his plantation overseer. Initially, Berkeley refuses him a commission to lead an army against the Indians, but Bacon doesn't care. Acclaimed by the gathered men who chant "a Bacon" as he takes charge, he takes matters into his own hands and organizes a force all on his own. Gathering the armed and willing men, he taps into the visceral fear of the Indians on the frontier and leads a scorched earth campaign against the Susquehannock and Occaneechi. It's a war of eradication. A total war. Bacon is not just fighting for safety, he's fighting to break the Indians, both so the attacks end and so the land his followers desperately need to escape the sub-penny trap of the Tidewater is opened up. So Bacon, now operating outside the bounds of Berkeley's legal sanction, leads a volunteer force of grim-faced frontiersmen deep into the jagged, sun-dappled interior to settle this Indian problem with blood. He marches toward the Occaneechi Island on the Roanoke River, initially playing a cynical game of diplomacy along the frontier by convincing the Occaneechi to attack the Susquehannock on his behalf. But once the Susquehannock threat is neutralized, Bacon reveals his cold, scorched earth logic. In a sudden and terrifying betrayal, he turns his muskets on the Occaneechi allies, slaughtering men, women, and children to break the strength of the Indians, and thus their effective monopoly on the fertile backcountry. Hundreds die. The air hangs heavy with the scent of pine and gunpowder as Bacon's men put the torch to the Occaneechi forts, clearing the path for the next wave of English settlement. It is a war of total removal, a brutal declaration of Bacon's skill, efficiency, and intent. It also largely solves the Indian problem that was the catalyst of the revolt. But the conflict escalates with breathtaking speed. When Berkeley brands him a rebel, Bacon issues his Declaration of the People. It's a stunning document. It brands the Virginia gentry as sponges and juggling parasites who have engrossed the wealth of the colony while leaving the people defenseless. All the complaints of Berkeley's government being an incorrigibly corrupt, inhumanely oppressive, and inexcusably efficient one that left the settlers defenseless break into the open once more. Bacon then marches on Jamestown. The escalation begins in June, as Bacon, now branded a rebel, is intercepted while sailing down the James River with a small flotilla of armed supporters. He's captured and brought to Jamestown, not in chains, as would befit a common criminal, but as a wayward cousin of the Gentry, as indeed he is. All he did was defend the settlement against Indians, after all. Berkeley, ever the master of seigneurial gesture, does not execute him immediately. For this, he will face much censure from his supporters in the future. Instead, the governor stages a grand performance of mercy. Before a packed assembly in the church, Bacon is forced to kneel and sign a formal confession of his rebellious and mutinous actions. Berkeley, standing in the pulpit of power, looks down at the kneeling renegade and repeatedly declares, "God forgive you, I forgive you." It's a calculated act. Berkeley is attempting to fold the prodigal son back into the establishment and neutralize the fury of the frontier through a munificent act of aristocratic grace. He even restores Bacon to a seat on the council. Given that Bacon largely neutralized the Indian threat, all might be well. But peace is not so easily bought. Within days, Bacon slips away from Jamestown under the cover of night. He realizes that Berkeley's pardon is a gilded cage, and likely to be reneged upon at some point. He returns to the frontier, not as a reformed counselor, but as the general of the people. By the time he reappears on the outskirts of Jamestown on June 23rd, 1676, he is backed by 500 grim-faced men, their muskets loaded with the frustrations of the frontier, their minds bent on violence. They're going to get their way. He marches into the town square, his so-called rabble fanning out to cover the windows of the State House. This is the moment of that great confrontation. Berkeley emerges to meet him, not with an army, but by himself, backed by his sheer force of will and character. The governor is 70 years old, yet he stands with the terrifying composure of a man who knows that if he fails here, the Old Dominion could die with him. He remains intransigent. He won't give out the commission Bacon wants. As Bacon's men level their pieces at the State House windows, Berkeley strides towards Bacon, rips open his silk doublet, and reveals his bare chest, challenging the very legitimacy of the rebellion and seeing what Bacon will do. "Here, shoot me. For God, a fair mark, shoot." He dares the cousin out of favor to commit the ultimate act of treason. Bacon, unnerved by the governor's steel, does not fire, nor do his men. Nor when the enraged old Governor Berkeley draws his sword and challenges Bacon to a duel, does he consent. Instead, he yells that he has not come to harm a hair on the governor's head, but to demand a commission to save the colony from the Indian heathen. The standoff is agonizing. Inside the State House, the burgesses are terrified. They see the muskets aimed at them from the square below. Under the crushing weight of duress and stress, the council breaks when the governor did not. They persuade him to sign the commission, to give Bacon what he wants. Berkeley, defeated by the mob, but unbroken in spirit, pens his name, granting Bacon the legal authority to lead the army he now commands, one that will eventually burn his capital. Bacon takes his commission, and his followers demand more. Having forced the governor's hand with 500 muskets in the streets, Bacon's assembly pushes through a series of reforms that attempt to dismantle the gentry's closed loop of power. They repeal the restrictive 1670 law to restore the franchise to all freemen, strike it the dual office holding that allows a single grande to monopolize local fees, and most crucially, they fight to open the vestries, those self-perpetuating local directorates of church power, to the election of the people. Egalitarian social change is coming to Virginia, or so it seems. Then, as soon as he's come, Bacon is gone. Setting out to fulfill his original purpose, what all of this is about, he vanishes back into the woods to hunt the Susquehannock, but then finds out that the governor's after him again, and his laws are being fought against. The war with the Indians is mostly called off, and the fight returns to the settled tidewater. By September, after a summer of maneuvering and counter-maneuvering, Bacon returns to find Berkeley has retaken the capital. The siege of Jamestown begins. Bacon's tactics are as ruthless as they are effective. He captures the wives of the Green Spring Grandes, the White Aprons, and forces them to stand upon the ramparts of his trenches to prevent Berkeley's cannons from firing. It's a chilling violation of the Gentry's code of honor, a sign that the rebellion has moved beyond the bounds of civilized conflict and is ready to play for keeps in this war with the government. On the night of September 19th, 1676, realizing he cannot hold the town against a determined counterattack, Bacon makes a tactical, scorched earth decision. He orders his men to put the town to the torch. The fire starts at the State House. It spreads to the church. The very sight of Bacon's hollow pardon consumes the taverns and the brick homes. As the flames lick the sky, the town that served as the heart of Virginia for an entire era is reduced to charcoal and ash. Berkeley is forced into a humiliating retreat to the eastern shore. From the deck of his ship, he watches the horizon glow red, seeing the literal and figurative incineration of the world he's spent 3 decades building. The heart of the Old Dominion has gone up in smoke, and the great engrossment and all its pains, from Indian attacks to sub-penny prices, is now written in fire. The fire of September 19th leaves Jamestown a smoking ruin, but the rebellion does not die with the capital. Bacon retreats into the Gloucester countryside, his rabble still clutching their muskets, but the momentum of the movement is now tethered to his health, the health of a single man. In October 1676, nature intervenes where Berkeley's cannons could not. Nathaniel Bacon, the general of the people, is struck down by the bloody flux, a brutal, agonizing dysentery that ravages his body and kills him. When Bacon finally expires in the house of a friend, his inner circle is so terrified of Berkeley-led desecration of the corpse that they bury him in a secret, unmarked grave, allegedly weighted with stones into the depths of the York River so that Berkeley can never find the body to hang it in chains. But with its head removed, the body of the rebellion begins to thrash in aimless, fractured spasms. The leadership falls to men like Joseph Ingram and Gregory Walklate, but they lack Bacon's magnetic, aristocratic pull, that dashing magnetism of a real Cavalier. The coalition of landless freedmen and frustrated yeomanry begins to dissolve as the reality of their treason and what it could mean sets in. Across the Chesapeake Bay, on the eastern shore to which he fled, Sir William Berkeley watches the collapse with the cold, patient eyes of a raptor. So, when he returns, he does not do so as a conciliator or a politician seeking a compromise, but as a judge carrying a noose. The bloody assizes that follow are a visceral demonstration of Berkeley's belief in the necessity of hierarchy and order. He systematically hunts down the rebel leaders, offering no mercy to those who had attacked the order he established, whatever their social rank. The most poignant moment of this vengeance is his meeting with William Drummond, the former governor of North Carolina and one of Bacon's most ardent supporters. When Drummond is brought before him, Berkeley bows low with a terrifying, mocking grace and says, "Mr. Drummond, you're very welcome. I'm more glad to see you than any man in Virginia. Mr. Drummond, you shall be hanged in half an hour." Berkeley keeps his word. Drummond hangs from a makeshift gallows by nightfall. Berkeley holds court on the decks of ships and in the parlors of loyalist estates, handing down death sentences with a speed that shocks the conscience even of the old world. He hangs 23 of the rebellion's prominent men, a tally of blood so high that it eventually reaches the ears of King Charles II back in London. The king, who was then trying to move England away from the carnage of the Civil War era, was reportedly appalled by Berkeley's medieval thirst for retribution, and famously remarked, "That old fool has hanged more men in that naked country than I have done for the murder of my father." Berkeley has won the war, but he has lost the all-important favor of the crown, and this proves his downfall. The king dispatches a commission of inquiry and a regiment of troops to bring royal order and peace to the naked country, effectively ending Berkeley's 30-year reign as the curator of the Tidewater. The old governor is recalled in disgrace, sailing for London in 1677, only to die before he can defend himself to his king. But as he leaves, for one last time, he leaves behind a gentry class that has been transformed. They've seen the fire, they've seen the noose, and they are now ready to pivot toward a new, more stable form of mastery that will never again allow the rabble to threaten their seat of power. When the smoke clears, it reveals a chilling realization for the topping people. The gentry have looked into the abyss and seen their own destruction. They realize that a society built on a massive class of armed, landless, white freedmen, men who share the same language and same sense of English rights as their masters, is structurally unsustainable. Further, many of them had, like William Byrd, somewhat agreed with Bacon's rebels, particularly on the Indian issue, even if they kept quiet about it. So, knowing that what they had built was unsustainable, a great pivot came. The gentry, already smarting at the costs of indentured servitude, began to systematically abandon it. They think, for one, that the servant of today could be a rebel of tomorrow. Further, they know the indentured servant model to be both overly expensive and unreliable, for all the reasons we covered in episode 1 of this series. To secure their mastery, they need a labor force that can never become landless competitors. To secure their wealth, they need one that will never be free. And so, between 1680 and 1700, the gentry utilized their capital to shift toward the stability of a permanent, hereditary, enslaved workforce. This is a survival mechanism designed to ensure that there will never be another Bacon's Rebellion, and also a transformative change that further shifts the mechanics of tobacco growing away from the yeomen and to the grandees. As Thomas Jefferson Wertenbacher notes of this era in his The Planters of Colonial Virginia, a classic on the literature of this period, the vast expansion of the tobacco trade, while bringing prosperity to the great planters, was no great boon to the man who tilled his fields with his own hands. It assured him a ready sale for his crop, it is true, but at prices so low as to leave him a very narrow margin of profit. The new era which was opening, the so-called golden age of Virginia history, was not for him. Virginia in the 18th century was to be the land of the slaveholder, not of the little planter. Before slavery became so popular, the yeomanry had a chance, if a narrow one, to become something more prosperous than their ancestors could have dreamt of. Wertenbacher notes, it was the cheapness of the land and the dearness of labor which gave the newcomer his chance to rise. Slavery changed that. Labor remained expensive, but the grandees could buy more and more of it without importing future yeomen, and the existing yeomen couldn't afford slaves. Thus, the grandees used slavery to solidify their prominence. Still, times are not uniformly bad for the yeomen. The years after Bacon's rebellion are reasonably good ones, all things considered. The Indian attacks, the real fuel for Bacon's rebellion, had largely ended thanks to Bacon. Further, low prices, the other long-term problem that caused so much angst, were coming to an end, if only temporarily. By the late 1680s, the global tobacco glut began to ease, and the price of tobacco finally climbed out of the basement, rising back up to a stable 2 or 3 pennies per pound. This penny piece does more to stabilize Virginia than any law Berkeley ever signed. At 3 pennies a pound, the yeoman finally achieves a competency. He can pay his taxes, clothe his children, and, most importantly, build enough wealth that he feels he has a stake in the existing order. The price hike, paired with an end to the Indian raids, provides the material buffer that allows the gentry to buy off the white yeomanry, offering them a modest prosperity and a sense of racial solidarity in exchange for their loyalty to the gentry's rule. The pressure cooker is vented, the frontier is pushed back, the labor force is stabilized, and the price of the leaf finally subsidizes the seigneurial ideal. As we enter the 18th century, we see the final transfiguration of the Virginia landscape. The stock has been planted, the rebellion has been survived, and the penny piece has provided the surplus. This is the era the Old Dominion's planters start to become truly refined. The fortified and wooden structures in which they once lived gradually fade away, and the brick and mortar symmetry of the Georgian mansion begins to appear along the shores of the mighty rivers the planters have engrossed. Westover, seed of the Bird family, is a classic example. This is the Golden Age, the era of prosperity, fertile soil, and peace that saw the real birth of the first families of Virginia, as we think of them today, and the solidification of the class they represent. Engrossment is no longer a desperate land grab. It's an aesthetic of mastery. The topping people, the Carters, the Lees, the Birds, use their massive, engrossed holdings to create a theater of seigneurial grace. They import expensive and refined furniture from London, practice the cultivated arts of hospitality, and govern their counties with a renewed confidence supported by their wealth and dignity. The estate is no longer a defensive outpost. It is a refined domain that serves as a basis for political aspirations and social leadership. The gentry have successfully engineered a society where the brain and the hands, those aspects of Cavalier society we spoke about last time, are perfectly aligned under a banner of tobacco-funded prosperity. Bacon's rebellion, in the end, was the fire that forged the Virginia gentry of the Golden Age and beyond, the setting that led to the foundation of the Old Dominion for the next 2 centuries. The Great Engrossment is complete. The Tidewater is a wall of estates, and the Golden Age has begun. Thank you for listening. We'll see you again next time. Bye.